When the first military coup in West Africa was carried out in Togo on January 13, 1963, it marked the beginning of unnecessary military interventions in the region. Exactly 3 years later, on January 15, 1966, Nigeria would experience its own first military coup just 5 years and 3 months after independence and less than 3 years after becoming a republic. However, analyzing Nigeria's first coup is very challenging, that one has to go back to the political situation in the First Republic to understand the reasons for the coup. In this inside story of Nigeria's first military coup, we shall take a look at how the coup happened. Who led the coup? Was it an Igbo coup? And of course, the aftermath of Nigeria's first military coup of January 15th, 1966. A few years after the British had taken over the territory that later came to be referred to as Nigeria, Lord Frederick Lugard, the then governor of the Northern Nigeria Protectorate, signed a document consolidating the two protectorates, that is, the southern and northern provinces, thereby creating the colony and protectorate of Nigeria on January 1st, 1914. The British had only one thing in mind while carrying out the amalgamation: for economic reasons and administrative convenience, thus making the union a sham, so to speak. With the foundation laid, Nigeria continued to grow and develop with agitations by Nigerian nationalists for an independent state. In response to the growth of Nigerian nationalism and demands for independence, successive constitutions legislated by the British government moved Nigeria towards self-government on a representative and increasingly federal basis. In 1954, the colony became the Autonomous Federation of Nigeria. By the middle of the 20th century, the great wave of independence was sweeping across Africa. Thus, 46 years after the amalgamation, Nigeria became an independent state on October 1st, 1960. When Nigeria gained its independence in 1960, the whole country was agog with celebration. Little did it know that 6 years down the line, a bloody coup would take place, followed by a counter-coup and even a civil war that would claim the lives of thousands of people. The British Empire had earlier claimed rulership over Nigeria, forming the Southern and Northern Nigeria Protectorates. This was cemented by the amalgamation of the two protectorates in 1914 by Lord Frederick Lugard. The British Empire would go on to rule Nigeria for almost 60 years before the motion for independence would be initiated. In 1958, the British had agreed to yield to the demands of independence. After being under British rule since 1862, Nigeria gained its independence almost 100 years later in 1960. Those who played a key role in achieving this great feat included Benjamin Nnamdi Azikiwe, Ahmadu Bello, Obafemi Awolowo, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, Fumilayo Ransome Kuti, amongst others. In 1963, Nigeria became a federal republic with Nnamdi Azikiwe becoming its first president. As of 1963, Nigeria was a diverse country with so many ethnic groups. It was not a surprise that at some point, certain groups began to feel marginalized and cried out for proper representation in the corridors of power. With its high population mass and larger geographical allocation compared to other regions in Nigeria, the North seemed to have dominated the government from the very beginning, having won 134 out of 312 seats in the first parliament under the Northern People's Congress (NPC). The Igbo-dominated National Council of Nigerian Citizens (NCNC) party had followed behind, garnering 89 seats in the parliament, while the Action Group AG, which represented mostly the Yoruba people, got only 73 seats. Within the period, agitations began to arise about the unequal distribution of power across the federation, backed up by allegations of corruption, anarchy, and rigged elections. The 1964 elections came up just after the leader of the Western region, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, was tried and imprisoned for treasonable felony, conspiracy, and possession of firearms. To the disappointment of many Westerners, Chief Samuel Ladoke Akintola won the October 1965 Western regional elections amidst political violence and rigging. Chief Akintola was considered to be a puppet and a willing tool in the hands of the Northerners. This ushered in the beginning of violence and misgivings in the political system, as the results were said to have been vigorously rigged. Chief Akintola was from the Nigerian National Democratic Party, NNDP, which many considered to be in close relations with the MPC, and this insinuated that the Northerners were now in charge of the Western region. Refusing to accept this electoral verdict, many of the political thugs in the Western region resorted to violence in varying degrees, including arson, protest, and murder. The situation came to be known as Operation Weti. The political situation in the West has been described to be one of the triggers for Nigeria's first military coup, which was led by Majors Emmanuel Arinze Ifeajuna in the south and Patrick Chukwuma Kaduna Nziogu in the north. By August 1965, the plan for the coup was formed, and the recruitment of officers who shared the plotters' ideology commenced. Now, let us take a look at the main players of the January coup. Although there had been rumors of a coup in the wake of the mayhem ongoing in the Western region, nothing significant happened until the cold morning of January 15, 1966. Those who actively carried out Nigeria's first military coup include Emmanuel Ifeajuna, Kaduna Nziogu, Adewale Ademoyega, Timothy Onwatuegu, Chris Anuforo, Don Okafor, Humphrey Chukwuka, Emmanuel Nwobosi, Ganiyu Adeleke, John Atom Pera, Fola Oyewole, and Ben Bulie. One persistent myth is that Nigeria's first military coup was led by 5 Igbo majors. The "we were 5 in number" comment by Kaduna Nziogu, made in an interview in May 1967 after the coup, is the source of this myth. The 5 majors myth was later perpetuated by Captain Ben Bulie's book on the coup, Nigeria's 5 Majors, which he admittedly based on a BBC play of the same name. Nziogu's infamous "we were 5 in number" remark made no mention of the rank of the 5. He was simply referring to the coup's 5 designated strategic regional commanders. In fact, 9 majors were originally scheduled to take part in the coup. Majors Nziogu, Ifeajuna, Ademoyega, Okafor, Anuforo, Chukwuka, Obienu, Onwatuegu, and Chude Soki. Shortly before the coup in January, Chude Soki was posted abroad. Obienu failed to show up on the day of the coup, leaving 7 majors as participants. When it came to the coup's execution, the majors designated 5 officers as regional commanders. There were Nziogu and Onwatuegu in the north, and 3 more in the south, which made up Nziogu's "we were 5" comment. In the south, the head of the Lagos operations was Major Emmanuel Ifeajuna. That makes 3 majors so far. The squad that assassinated Chief Samuel Ladoke Akintola in Ibadan was led by Captain Emmanuel Nwobosi. That brings us to 4, 3 majors and 1 captain. There was no coup in the Midwest because no military formation was stationed there. Lieutenant Jerome Oguchi, however, was dispatched to the east to arrest the premier of the eastern region, Michael Okpara. The identity of the 5th member is the most difficult to determine. Majors Don Okafor and Adewale Ademoyega were given a lot of responsibility for the Lagos branch of the coup, and one of these 2 men was most likely the 5th commander. Or it could have been Oguchi himself. There appears to have been some debate among the majors about whether or not to kill the target personalities. There was disagreement as some wanted all targets to be shot without exception, while others insisted on no blood being shed. However, they could not agree on whether some people should be killed or not. This issue was therefore left to the judgment of the officers. As a result, this decision proved unwise. It appears extraordinary that for such a sensitive operation, such as whether or not to take or save lives, such a major decision was left to the discretion of individual soldiers. Without strict predetermined parameters, such an operation would inevitably result in random executions, giving rise to the appearance of tribal killings. Some characters in the plot maintained a consistent approach. Majors Anuforo and Nziogo appeared to be among those who made predetermined decisions to kill their targets, while Lieutenant Oguchi appears to be among those who did not wish to harm their targets. Major Onwatuegu and Captain Nwobosi were inconsistent in their approach. That is the next part of our discussion. In the early hours of January 15, 1966, in Kaduna, Major Kaduna Nziogu, just like every other night, led his soldiers on the exercise Damisa, a few meters to the lodge of the Premier of the Northern Region, Sir Amadu Bello. The true aim of the exercise was to indeed carry out what would become Nigeria's first military coup. When they got close to the Premier's lodge, Nziogu then made the true purpose of the exercise clear to the soldiers. They were to eliminate the Premier. They then broke into the lodge by firing at it, but Bello could not be found. Enraged, Major Nziogu searched for the Premier frantically until he eventually found him among his wives and cries of little children. Without thinking twice, he shot him dead. Other casualties in this exercise were one of Bello's wives and a loyal bodyguard who both tried to shield the Premier from gunfire. In Lagos, Majors Emmanuel Ifeajuna, Humphrey Chukwuka, Don Okafor, and Ademoyega ran the show. Ifeajuna led the group of soldiers to Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa's house, where he was arrested. Although it was not in their original plan to kill the Prime Minister, Balewa was shot and killed when it became apparent that the coup had failed. Ifeajuna also carried out the killing of Lieutenant Colonel Abogo Lagima, who was the commander of the 4th Battalion in Ibadan. Lagima had been a guest at a hotel in Ikoyi when he was lured out of his hotel room to the lobby, where he was gunned down by the major. Lieutenant Colonel David Ejo, the commanding officer of a battalion in Enugu, had also been a guest at the party and a target for the coup plotters that night as well. But he narrowly escaped death by a last-minute change of hotel room from the one initially booked for him. On the night of the coup, a party was being held in honor of Brigadier Mai Malari. Some other senior officers in the army were in attendance. Lieutenant Colonel James Yakubu Pam was abducted in the presence of his wife and children and killed shortly after by Major Chris Anuforo. Major Anuforo was also responsible for the deaths of Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Chinyelu Unegbe, Colonel Kerr Mohammed, and Minister of Finance Chief Festus Okotie Ebo. The premier of the Western region, Chief Samuel Ladoke Akintola, had heard rumors of the coup before the day and tried to warn Sir Amadu Bello, but to no avail. He was at his home in Ibadan when the wife of his deputy, Chief Fani Kayode, who had already been arrested, called Akintola to warn him of the impending danger. Not long after, a group of soldiers led by Captain Emmanuel Nwobosi arrived at the premier's lodge. Immediately, Chief Akintola opened fire and defended himself. He was eventually killed by Captain Nwobosi and his men. By the time the coup plotters stopped firing, only one of the army's high command was alive and well, Major General Johnson Umunnakwe Thomas Ironsi. Ifeajuna's failure to eliminate General Ironsi was a fatal blow to the coup. Ironsi and other senior officers had been at the party organized by Brigadier Mai Malari to show off his new teenage bride. After the party, by a fortuitous turn of events, Ironsi went on to attend another party while other officers returned to their homes and lodges. When Major Don Okafor and his team of mutineers reached Ironsi's home, he was nowhere to be found. Hours later, the GOC came home only to be informed of the ongoing plot to overthrow the government. He had been contacted by Elizabeth Pam and from the residence of the Prime Minister. Ironsi subdued the coup and became the only senior officer on the death list who survived the onslaught. When Nziogu discovered that the South had not been completely taken over by Ifeajuna, he made a radio broadcast declaring a state of martial law over the northern region of the country. By the end of the coup, about 22 lives had been brutally claimed. The civilians who had been killed included Prime Minister Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, Premiers Amadu Bello and Samuel Ladoke Akintola, Finance Minister Festus Okotie Ebo, Ahmed Ben Musa. This was Amadu Bello's Senior Assistant Secretary for Security. Hafsatu Bello, Latifat Ademulegun, the pregnant wife of Brigadier Samuel Ademulegun, who was shot in bed with her husband, Zarumi, Amadu Bello's bodyguard, and Ahmed Pategi, the premier's driver. Military and police personnel include Brigadiers Samuel Ademulegun and Zakaria Maimalari, Colonels Ralph Shodeinde and Colonel Mohammed, Lieutenant Colonels Abogo Lagima, James Yakubu Pam and Author Chinyelu Unegbe, Sergeant Daramola Oyegoke, Lance Corporal Musa Nimzo, Police Constables Yohana Garkawa, Akpan Anduka, Hagai Lai and Philip Lewande. The president, Nnamdi Azikiwe, was abroad on medical leave at the time of the coup. Nwafor Orizu, the acting president, while Azikiwe was away, was also spared in the onslaught. Shortly after the coup failed, the Rum cabinet of Tafawa Balewa tried to choose an acting prime minister in the person of Zana Bukar Dipkarima, but Orizu did not give any approval. However, after a meeting with Ironsi, Orizu announced at 11 p.m. on January 16, 1966, that the cabinet had handed over the reins of affairs to the military. The next day, Monday, January 17, 1966, General Aguiyi Ironsi officially took over the leadership of the country. He established a Supreme Military Council and thus began the first military regime in Nigeria. Nziogu also surrendered after negotiations with Ironsi after the latter had sent some delegates on a peace talk to Nziogu to elicit willful surrender. After agreeing with Ironsi's conditions, Nziogu surrendered and handed over the northern region 3 days after the coup before he was arrested and detained contrary to the initial agreement. Other co-conspirators of the coup were also arrested, but they never appeared before a military tribunal for 6 months, and this singular act, considered unjust by the northern section of the Nigerian Army, would pave the way for more devastating events. Since 1966, Major Kaduna Nziogu has been hyped as the leader of Nigeria's first military coup. This has been widely assumed as a result of Nziogu's visible role during and after the coup. The Major was the only one who was able to carry out the coup successfully in his chosen target region. Following his coup victory, he delivered his infamous speech over the radio. As a result, the false belief that he was the coup leader circulated. Nziogu was not the leader of Nigeria's first military coup on January 15, 1966. As a matter of fact, he was not brought into the conspiracy until the coup plot reached the logistical stage. Major Emmanuel Ifeajuna was no doubt the brain behind the coup. He was an Onitsha-born Igbo who served as brigade major in Lagos. He was a well-known international athlete who held the Commonwealth record for high jumping. He also attended the University of Ibadan. Ifeajuna later wrote a manuscript outlining his reasoning for believing a military coup was necessary. This manuscript was never published. When Ifeajuna realized Ironsi was rounding up those who had participated in the coup, he disguised as a woman and fled to Ghana. Some argue that Nziogu's involvement in the January 1966 coup was part of a grand Igbo plan to dominate the country. This argument ignores the fact that Nziogu was an Igbo only in name. Major Nziogu was born in Kaduna, the capital of the northern region, to Igbo immigrant parents from Okpanam, present-day Delta State, then in the Midwest region of Nigeria as of the time of the coup. His family and military colleagues refer to him as Kaduna because of their attachment to the city of Nziogu's birth. Kaduna Nziogu wore Northern Mufti when he wasn't in his army uniform and frequently referred to himself as a Northerner. Nziogu spoke Hausa, the lingua franca of the northern region, like a local. In fact, Nziogu's command of the Hausa language was superior and better than his command of the Igbo language. So, what possessed a moralistic young man like Nziogu to assassinate the nation's most powerful northern politician in the dead of night? Nziogu's logic is chilling in its simplicity. To get rid of corrupt ministers, political parties, trade unions, and the entire clumsy apparatus of the federal system. What is certain is that Nziogu harbored anti-government sentiments for several years before January 1966. Colonel Ralph Shodeyinde, Nziogu's boss at the Nigerian Military Training College, had previously reported the major to Army headquarters for allegedly disseminating anti-government messages to junior officers. According to Shodeyinde's report, Nziogu was attempting to poison the minds of these junior officers against the government. Even though the coup had been largely termed an Igbo coup, it was foiled by Igbo officers. Interestingly, those who foiled the coup were Igbo senior officers: Major General Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi, Emeka Ojukwu, Conrad Chukwu Jimje Dibia Nwawo, Alexander Atta Madiebo, and Major Afonso Keshi. As Brigade Major, Keshi informed Madibo of the coup. Madibo moved over to the brigade headquarters where Nziogu had taken over Ademulegun's seat and worked on Nziogu. Ojukwu, commanding officer 5th Battalion, stood his ground strategically and all worked with Ironsi to end the coup. Although he may have wanted to end the MPC government, Ojukwu was not willing to work with the majors. He was at the parade ground when a telegram arrived informing him of the coup. Before he dared to tell his men, Ojukwu disarmed them, locked the armory, and sent the armory keys to a relative in Kano for safekeeping. Ojukwu informed his friend Kano's emir, Alhaji Ado Bayero, of the event, and the two men rode in the same car through Kano's streets, making a radio appeal for calm in coordinated acts of solidarity. Bayero was then taken to the battalion for protection by Ojukwu. He also received orders from one brigade in Kaduna, allegedly from Brigadier Ademulegun, but he wasn't fooled and ignored the orders. When Nziogu came out and later asked Ojukwu to release funds to pay his soldiers, Ojukwu refused. Captain Ude, one of Nziogu's aides, was dispatched to Kano, but was arrested on Ojukwu's orders when he arrived. Brigadiers Johnson Ironsi, Samuel Ademulegun, Babafemi Ogundipe, and Zachariah Maimalari were the foremost senior officers of Nigerian origin before indigenous soldiers took control of the army. When it was announced that the British soldiers would soon leave the country, it became clear that the experienced trioca of Ironsi, Ademulegun, and Ogundipe were the prime candidates for the position of Grand Officer Commanding GOC of the Nigerian Army. Of the three brigaders, Agoye Ironsi was the most decorated. He was a tall, physically imposing man who appeared to be a soldier, but was easygoing and spoke in a slow, measured tone. Ironsi was regarded as the best soldier of his generation, capable of commanding a United Nations peacekeeping force in the Congo, which he did twice, the first African to do so. While in the Congo, Ironsi took the rank of Major General, but when he returned to Nigeria, he reverted to Brigadier. Brigadier Samuel Ademulegun was the most controversial of the brigaders. He was a disciplined officer. While he was recognized as a first-class soldier, he was unpopular in the army, particularly among junior officers. His open friendship with Sir Amadu Bello, the Saduna of Sokoto, earned him few military friends, and accepting a horse as a gift from the Saduna irritated many junior officers who ignored the fact that Ademulegun was not in a position to refuse gifts from the country's most powerful politician. Ademulegun ironically believed that his political connections would land him in the position of GOC, and as a result, when he did not get the job, he became envious of the new GOC and was not shy about pointing out the shortcomings of the man chosen ahead of him. Brigadier Zachariah Maimalari was a notoriously ferocious disciplinarian who would not tolerate insubordination. He demanded unqualified discipline from all his juniors. He was well liked in the army and was expected to become a future GOC. Major General Welby Everard, the departing British GOC, in recommending his successor, stated that Maimalari was younger, more junior to the others, and militarily immature. To Everard, Maimalari was never a serious consideration. Brigadier Babafemi Ogundipe had a more reserved personality than Brigadiers Ademulegun and Maimalari. Unlike Ademulegun, he was well liked and respected within the army, both as a senior officer and as a man. He was also conspicuously unpolitical. Ogundipe was regarded by Everard as a very capable and efficient officer. The British GOC then recommended Brigadier Ogundipe as his successor, but it was without success. The Sir Tafawa Balewa-led federal government ignored the advice of its departing British GOC and gave the top job to Agoye Ironsi. The failure of the majors to arrest or kill Adeyinka has led some to believe that he was involved in or was at the very least aware of the coup plot. Ironsi and other senior officers had become concerned about the possibility of a junior officer's coup in the weeks leading up to the coup. These concerns were relayed to the Prime Minister, who either ignored them or chose not to act in response. As a result, Adeyinka was either in on the plot and an ally of the majors, or he was on the majors' hit list but managed to escape due to information provided by Igbo participants within the coup circle. However, Nziogo's interview in May 1967 may shed some truth. He had said in the interview with Dennis Ejindu that Adeyinka was to have been shot, but that they were not ruthless enough. Thus, Ironsi and his loyalists were able to supplant them. If Ironsi was part of the coup plot, why would the majors plan to kill him? Ironsi's survival in January was due to luck rather than the knowledge of the coup plot. His survival was also in part to the major's tactical mistake in arresting or killing other senior officers before getting to Ironsi. He had been tipped off that something unusual was happening via a phone call from Elizabeth Palm, James Palm's wife, in the early stages of the coup. The uproar caused by the assassination of other officers alerted Ironsi to the coup, and he was able to rally troops who assisted him in putting down the coup. After the coup was put down, Ironsi met with the surviving members of Tafawa Balewa's federal cabinet, who reportedly handed over the reins of government to Ironsi, who then suspended several parts of the constitution. The new head of state then went on to ban all political parties and formed a new military government with a Supreme Military Council consisting of the following: Major General Johnson Adeyinka himself as the Supreme Commander, Nigerian Armed Forces and Head of State, Brigadier Babafemi Ogundipe, Chief of Staff, Nigerian Defense Forces, Commodore Joseph Edet Akinwale Way, Commanding Officer, Nigerian Navy, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, Chief of Staff, Nigerian Army, Lieutenant Colonel George Kurubo, Commanding Officer, Nigerian Air Force, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu, Military Governor, Eastern Region, Lieutenant Colonel Hassan Usman Katsina, Military Governor, Northern Region, Lieutenant Colonel David Ejo, Military Governor, Midwest Region, and Lieutenant Colonel Francis Adekunle Fajuyi, Military Governor, Western Region. Nigeria's first military coup on January 15, 1966, opened the door to a series of other coups and calamitous events, like the Northern counter-coup of July 1966 and the Nigerian Civil War a year later in 1967. General Yakubu Gowon, the head of state, who succeeded Ironsi, set up policies for nation-building after the war. The National Youth Service Corps program was born out of this purpose in 1973 to unite Nigeria again. However, Gowon was overthrown in a bloodless coup that saw Brigadier Murtala Muhammad take over as a new Nigerian head of state. Muhammad himself would be assassinated in an abortive coup on February 13, 1976, which then saw the emergence of another head of state, General Olusegun Obasanjo, in a space of just 200 days. Obasanjo's regime paved the way for the Second Republic. The political ban which had been earlier placed was lifted and new elections were conducted. Alhaji Shehu Aliyu Usman Shagari emerged as the winner and became Nigeria's first executive president on October 1, 1979. After ruling for 4 years and 3 months, the Shagari administration was ended prematurely by another military coup. This time, Major General Muhammadu Buhari emerged as the next head of state. This would be the beginning of 16 years of consecutive military rule in Nigeria. The Buhari regime would only last for less than 2 years before another coup would overthrow his government. It was a palace coup that saw the emergence of General Ibrahim Babangida. Babangida's coup was the 6th one in Nigeria in just 25 years of independence. Interrupted by the failed Gideon Orka coup of April 22, 1990, Babangida would go on to rule Nigeria for 8 years until he handed over to an interim national government on August 26, 1993. With the initial promise to return to civilian rule in 1993, the famous June 12 elections were held. Purported to be the fairest elections Nigeria has ever witnessed since independence, businessman Moshood Kashimawo Olawale Abiola was proclaimed by some civil rights group as the winner. The results were, however, annulled by Babangida 11 days later on June 23, 1993, which led to riots and killings in the western parts of the country. Under immense pressure from both the military and Nigerians, Babangida reluctantly handed over to Chief Ernest Shonekan as head of the interim national government. Shonekan was to rule until the next elections that were slated for February 1994. But Nigeria's military rule was not yet over. On November 17, 1993, General Sani Abacha forced Shonekan to resign and took over as Nigeria's new head of state and commander-in-chief of the armed forces. You can check out the full story on how Abacha forced Shonekan to resign in our next video.